Daedalus here. The recent release of the movie Oppenheimer returned the debate over the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to public consciousness. This discourse has been heavily tainted by a desire to vilify the United States unduly. This is a complicated topic, and it requires more consideration than a simple narrative constructed by dogmatic and unthinking opponents of the current world order. Over the coming weeks, we will deconstruct some of those arguments and demonstrate how the dropping of the bombs was an edge call that was influenced heavily by Clausewitz's concept of friction. That is to say, the difference between the realities of war and its conceptualization. Taking each argument in isolation should make an opportunity to begin to properly demonstrate how to perform a historical analysis. This week, we will talk about the United States Strategic Bombing Survey and the related claim in the report that without the dropping of the bombs, without the Soviets entering the war, and that without an invasion, the Japanese would have surrendered no later than the 31st of December 1941. This report has been used as the scaffolding of an argument that the Japanese surrender was imminent and the dropping of the bombs was superfluous at best. I've linked to the particular page of the report in the description as source 1. The USSBS is a massive document that covers the bombing campaigns against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. It sought to analyze the effectiveness of the American and British strategic bombing efforts and what impact they had on Germany, with the specific intention of improving the efficacy of the bombing campaign upon Japan. However, the war was ultimately ended after the atomic bombs were dropped and well before the report's completion. Ultimately, the report was produced between the years of 1945 and 1947. This bears considerably on the accuracy of the information contained within. Extensive study of the Second World War has been undertaken in the decades by professional historians without the pressure of having to determine the post-war direction of American air power. The U.S. Army Air Corps would be formally spun off into the United States Air Force, a separate service branch, in late September of 1947 with the passage of the National Security Act of 1947. The USSBS relied on the assessment of Allied High Command during the war and their battle damage assessments. While it's somewhat beyond our scope, these estimates were often generous and overestimated the actual efficacy of the strategic bombing efforts. Before we continue, a few notes. Strategic bombing is a specific type of mission. It is defined as attacking targets behind the front line with the intent of crippling enemy capacity to wage war both materially and psychologically. It differs from tactical bombing or close air support in that the intent of tactical bombing is to directly support the frontline units by destroying actively engaged enemy military assets. This video doesn't look to refute the efficacy of strategic bombing as a method of destroying industry and vital transportation hubs. Again, this is beyond the scope of the video, but it is an undeniable fact that such bombings had a significant impact on Axis logistical networks in the war. The intent is to challenge the assertion that bombardment alone can bring about surrender. Late in the war, Japan had been subject to what amounts to a blockade. American submarine patrols had utterly destroyed the Japanese merchant marine fleet. American ground forces had seized islands such as Iwo Jima, Saipan, and Okinawa in order to provide forward air bases from which specially designed high-endurance bombers would have the necessary flight range to bomb targets on the Japanese home islands. Firebombing tactics that had infamously been employed in the German cities of Hamburg and Dresden had also now been employed against Tokyo. The attacks were relentless, and it was against this backdrop that the USSBS predicted this surrender. This claim is problematic on a few levels. Pre-war theorists such as Julio Duhet had posited that armies had been rendered obsolete. Duhet maintained that fleets of large bombers would fly over an enemy country, destroying their industrial capacity and demoralizing the population. A nation so subjected to such bombing would surrender, both being unable and unwilling to fight. This concept has never been vindicated. The Germans did not break the British in 1941. The Allies did not break the Germans until the Red Army had all but destroyed Berlin. An ongoing contemporary example has Ukraine refusing to surrender against Russian terror bombing, targeting vital electric infrastructure during the previous winter. This campaign is likely to continue this winter as Russia faces increased pressure to bring some success in its stalled conquest of Ukraine. There simply exists no example of a country being forced into surrendering due to sustained strategic strikes, either through air-launched munitions or ground-based missile strikes. If anything, it would seem it just hardens the people's resolve. It also is worth mentioning that the absolute best of my knowledge has no modern industrial nation been forced to surrender while in a state of total war due solely to blockade. Many technologies and tactics reached a new state of maturity during the Second World War, and aviation was no exception. The scale of the bombing campaigns undertaken by the belligerent powers would have been unimaginable in the First World War. However, the claim made in the US SBS is quite particular. The survey's authors claim that without any further actions taken by the Allies to include Soviet entry into the war, or that without the use of the bombs, without the American invasion being executed or contemplated, Japan would have surrendered sometime between November and the end of December 1945. During this time, Japan would have been subjected to bombardment by American bombers, surrounded by the triumphant U.S. Navy in the Pacific, and the Imperial Japanese Army would have been actively engaged throughout Southeast Asia and China. While I cannot argue that Japan would have recovered from this situation, I would also caution against citing the hopelessness of their strategic situation as proof of surrender. It is simply a fact that the conditions of the time would have required a total defeat by invasion of the Japanese home islands. Nations simply do not surrender due to strategic bombing. The USSB's conclusion on this matter is not sufficient evidence upon which to rest an argument for Japan's surrender without further military intervention. Thank you for watching.